Welcome to this week's episode of Insight. During this week's show, we're going to be covering three distinct topics. One of them is going to be the corruption allegations against Deputy Prime Minister Tigran Avinyan. The second one is going to be going over the diplomatic spat between Canada and Russia in regards to Canada's opening of a new embassy in Yerevan. And lastly, what we've all been waiting for is an update on the building of Giant Jesus. Let's go over the allegations against the former Deputy Prime Minister Tigran Avinyan. There's essentially two primary ones. One of them involves the hemp marijuana business. In 2021, the government of Armenia actually legalized industrial hemp, and he was one of the people pushing for it when he was in government. 2 days after this law went into effect, him and a few of his partners set up one of the first companies to actually grow industrial hemp, which is obviously a clear conflict of interest. The second set of allegations are involved in his business partnerships or relationships with other prominent people in business who have serious corruption allegations against him. Now, Mr. Avinyan is important on multiple levels. One of them is that he's the announced candidate of the current party for next year's mayoral elections in Yerevan. Let me segue into the importance of those elections, the mayoral elections next year. You're going to have Mr. Avinyan from the ruling party, if he actually stays as the candidate, who's most likely going to be running against former President Kocharyan's son as the opposition candidate.
Well, that's Kocharyan, and that's a good start.
And likely multiple candidates coming in under the reformist camp of people who were aligned with Nikol Pashinyan but are no longer with him and are independent, part of an independent force and likely the new future opposition. So what's important about those elections is if the opposition wins those elections, whoever is the mayor of Yerevan, given the nature of the city and the size of it compared to the rest of the country, is almost certainly going to be the next candidate of the opposition to run against the prime minister the next time we have general elections. Let me just comment about these allegations. In many ways, these are quite disappointing because actually Mr. Avinyan has quite a reputation as someone who works very hard, and he's one of the few people that actually grew a lot when he was in office as a political operative. However, obviously none of these actions are acceptable. I would remind him and the other members of this current government that people did not get out in the streets in the hundreds of thousands in 2018, so we will be seeing stories like this in 2022, and this is unacceptable on any level. Now, having said this, we need to understand we should not be making false equivalencies. What we have here are individual acts of corruption, and they are not systematic in nature or vertical corruption as we had in the old regime, which is far more monopolistic and killing opportunities in the totality of the economy. But in truth, this is the beginning of a pattern. Couple of months ago, we had allegations very much like this versus for the brother of the current speaker, Alan Simonian. So this is something of a developing pattern, and it is something that needs to stop. The problem with corruption of this nature is it starts small, and if it not confronted, if not corrected, if not challenged, usually leads to bigger cases of corruption. And that is not something we need. Let's move on to the second topic of the week, which is the diplomatic spat between Russia and Canada in regards to Canada's announcement about them opening up an embassy in Yerevan. In and of itself, that's actually a good thing, and there was nothing controversial about it, except in the release that the Canadian Foreign Ministry made in regards to opening up an embassy in Yerevan. They clearly said that this was done to counter Russian influence in Armenia. This led to a very quick response from the Russian embassy in Yerevan, denouncing the Canadians and saying that this line of thinking and their argumentation in this case is actually disrespectful to Armenia. In and of itself, this is not very important. But what this does tell us is this is a very good example of the new Cold War environment that we are operating in. We're in a time period, given the war in Ukraine and the massive clash that we're seeing politically around the world, of a new Cold War. And obviously, we're going to be dragged right into it. There are essentially two parts to this. One of them, which is quite problematic for us, and especially, frankly, for all small countries, regionally and worldwide in many ways, but also an opportunity. The problem, obviously, is that when the world is this polarized, your room to maneuver is rather limited. And the way power diplomacy works is essentially larger states force smaller states to take positions that are not necessarily in their best interest, but they are forced to choose and compelled to do so because they are dealing with states that are much powerful than they are. However, this process is not all sticks and no carrots. At the same time, there are positive opportunities out there for any country that is willing to not get caught in these contradictions. What we're actually seeing in today's Ukraine is actually a country that was clearly caught in these contradictions and is obviously paying a terrible price for it. What's clearly important is that from a foreign policy perspective, what this tells us is the importance of us being able to triangulate between all of these different power centers as much as we can. For us specifically, that means enhanced security relationships with Russia or continued secure relationship with Russia as we deepen our democratic and economic integration with the West, which is very, very difficult to do. And in truth, the world today is actually breaking up into multiple other world power centers, and we will see the BRIC movement coming up between South Africa, Brazil, China. So the monolithic world is actually being torn apart, which also creates its own opportunities. Now, what this means for a state like ours is, again, not to get killed in these contradictions between these different powers, while you create scenarios where you can actually become useful. And one of the ways that we can be useful is to sort of become the new Finland. Finland used to be, a country during the Cold War that was a place where East and West met. If you look around the world, there's actually only two countries in the world. One of them very small, Armenia, and the other one's very large, India, that actually have good relationships with the EU, the United States, Iran, and Russia. So we can use this opportunity as a place where we can become a conduit for all of these sides. Now, how do you play off everyone in a way that placates them is, to quote a first century famous Palestinian, you give unto gods what is God's and you give unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, except in each of these cases, each party must think they're gods and their adversaries Caesar. Going to our last item of the week, which is in regards to the building of the giant Jesus statue that's going to be built in Mount Hatis in the Kotai region of Armenia. This is being constructed and paid for by who's a well-known businessman, former member of parliament, renowned for his love of subtle architectural styles. Let's go over the details of this Jesus. He's going to be 33 meters long, 1 meter for every year that he lived, which actually makes the statue larger than the one in Rio, which obviously leads to the question is what the engineering problems we would have faced if Jesus actually had been crucified as a pensioner. It would have been quite difficult to build the statue. The church itself has come out against the building of this statue, which tells us that even a broken clock can be right twice a day. The Prime Minister himself actually gave the green light to this project last week, precisely, probably because the church opposes it. The Prime Minister outlined his reasons for supporting the statue is that it will encourage tourism, which I'm certainly assuming that he's correct given the lack of taste that we have in this country. Well, what can we say about this in conclusion? Obviously, anyone who lives in Armenia, anyone who visits Armenia, clearly understands that what this country needs in this moment in history, more than anything else, is a giant statue of Jesus. Thank you for joining me in this week's episodes of Insights.
Հացանապազոր այսօրը դու